I've encountered every type of conspiracy theory you could imagine. Some of you, right? I don't have a problem discussing with someone who's got a conspiracy theory. I don't have a problem with it. Because after all, take on the one side a mild view of conspiracy theory. What is a conspiracy theory? It's a working hypothesis to try and understand the world. Now maybe your foundation for that hypothesis is wrong. You could, for example, say, and I said to this guy earlier on, 9/11, I said, well, I don't know what happened. But I do know, and the facts are clear, that a group of Saudi Arabians linked to the royal family of Saudi Arabia, backed by America and deeply influenced Pakistan through the madrasas and so on, and through the ISI in Pakistan, that they were the people who carried out the attacks, and that there are a correlation or correspondence between certain groups. That doesn't mean it was carried out by this or that CIA officer. I don't know. And in the end, I can't be bothered to go down the rabbit hole of finding out. Maybe in 20 years' time, we'll find out it was X, Y, and Z connected to so-and-so in the White House. I don't know. Nor do I particularly care. Because there are so many of these things that happen. It's impossible to keep track of all of them. And to be right on all of them in your guesses. I mean, we watch television. Every single week, watch crime program. It's a massive genre. No crime program could exist. Now, conspiracy theories. What does a bloody police officer do when he's trying to investigate a murder? He tries to work out who conspired with whom to commit the murder. Right? That's what they do. That's their job. When you've got business interests tied to government, tied to pharma, tied to big tech, tied to whatever other corporate interests. I know from direct experience, for example in Southern Council, that when contracts are being out, conspiracies are rife. Not only are conspiracies rife, but several conspiracies are rife at the same time to get the contract. Lobbyists will come from one company, and from another company, and from another company, and will try to speak to the officers who are responsible for allocating 1, 2, 10, 200 million pounds in the case of the Peckham Partnership programme for redeveloping Peckham in the early 2000s. And I know for a fact that there were conspiracies involved. I encountered some of them directly myself, and that's only in a local council. When you go on a global level, of course it takes on global aspects. Now, does that mean that every single act, from September the 11th to the Iraq War, to COVID-19, to, the war in Afghanistan, that every single one of them is conspiracy?
Yes, it is.
Probably not.
Everything's a conspiracy by definition.
Okay, you could argue that, but even then that's not true. See, the beauty about the philosophy that I propagate. Let me explain what I'm saying. The beauty about the philosophy that I propagate, Marxism, is that it doesn't require conspiracy to explain this.
You lost me, sir.
I don't have to have it. I don't have to have it with me. I try to explain what I think. Because I use the word Marxism, some people freak out and run away. I'm not hiding these things. If I was hiding it, and then someone turns around and says, after I've hidden it, says, oh, you're a Marxist. Look, that destroys him, doesn't it? What I'm saying is the following. Well, that's a good question. The argument I was going to make to you a second ago was the following. You said everything's a conspiracy. And the beauty about Marxism is it tries to explain as to how and why people act because of the external circumstances within which these events happen. So what causes someone, for example, what causes you to be here rather than someone from, a village in Afghanistan who's born with hardly any money and never really leaves the local area. So that's not per se conspiracy. it's a conspiracy of circumstances. The objective circumstances mean that you were born, I don't know where, that led you to be here, and they were born there that led them never to leave that area. And therefore the circumstances for a conspiracy, there's everything to do with it. Conditions determine circumstances. Conditions determine consciousness. Circumstances within which you're in determine what you can do. Now you can conspire, but that person in Afghanistan, in a little mountain village, maybe they can conspire if they join the Taliban and fight against the Americans. But otherwise, yes, I understand that. But the planning is within certain circumstances. It's not a totally independent act where the people conspiring can choose of their own volition what happens. That's why I tend to wait. You might choose to be an MP, but if you went to Eton, Oxford or Cambridge, you're more likely to become one. If you were a barrister, as well as having gone to Eton, Oxford or Cambridge, you're much more likely to become one. That's why nearly, I don't know, a third of members of Parliament in Britain are barristers, and went to Oxford and Cambridge, and probably Eton and Harrow. So you could say that's a conspiracy, and in many ways it is, but the objective circumstances that you have powers that be external to your volition or control to determine the parameters of what you can do. Well, that's all very well. That's all very, but even though that's true, if that old boy's network was destroyed and suddenly a virus came about or a bacteria came about that killed every person who went to Harrow, Eton, Oxford and Cambridge, overnight, a new layer of people will emerge who will do the same thing, effectively the same thing. That's why in countries like France, it's École Normale Supérieure rather than Oxford and Cambridge, right? And Sorbonne, right? And in Germany, well, it's the industrial layers. Former Nazis have a certain role. Liberals and former leftists have a certain role in German politics, because the nurturing of the ruling classes and their representatives has a slightly different feature and characteristic in each country. But to say that it's just a conspiracy is false. Sorry?
In Marxism, another class just takes over, like with the Bolsheviks. They just became the new ruling class.
Yes, I understand that's the general argument. I'm no fool.
The Marxists are just as bad, you're just as bad as the people that you protest against.
As I said, you could argue, and many people do argue, what you're saying is that there's something inherent to man which leads to the rise of hierarchy, which leads to the rise of particular forms of power, no matter what the ideas or... Exactly, well I'm repeating what you're saying. I'm not contradicting what you're saying. I'm trying to explain where that power comes from and why it differs in one social system from another. So why, for example, in China, if China is merely the expression of the innate nature of man, that there be hierarchies, power, dictators and rulers, exploited and exploited, if that's the automatic dynamic of humanity, why in China? There you go. There you go. The word of God. Thank you very much.
You're always going to
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to hear this. We needed this tonight. So let the Lord's voice speak out. Yes, let the Lord speak out. Let him speak through me. It's harder for a camel to pass into the kingdom of heaven than it is. No, it's harder for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven than it is for a camel to pass the eye of an eagle. He's on his way, look, coming next. The next interlude is Jesus Christ himself. How do we know he's Jesus? Because he's got a line across his head like that, which nobody else has got. And he'll be here shortly for the video cameras for the rest of the world. Now, where was I? Oh, yes. So if the hierarchy in China is the automatic reflection of the nature of man, as you have argued, why is the hierarchical structure different? Why is the political structure different than that elsewhere in the world?
Different countries, different circumstances. Now
So why is it calling itself
You're
communist?
saying the environmental conditions affect the political situation.
I am saying the socio-economic conditions determine the character of a regime and the power relations established within that regime. And that is why what happens in China... Sorry?
You're still going to have corruption under
Now
any
that
system.
may be a given, but if that is a given, then you have to examine what type of corruption affects what type of society, and why one differs from the other. And when you differentiate those things, then perhaps, as you argue, if it was true...
We do corruption so much better here, don't we?
What you said, that everything's a conspiracy and automatically man is under the thumb and the one type of dictatorship of another, how do you explain change?
That's a non sequitur.
Well, it's not a non sequitur. If,
It's a
for
decent
example,
question.
man in 2021 differs from man in 1500, why is it the case they differ? What makes us different?
Well, you told us 5 minutes ago.
We haven't changed from 1500 till now.
In what respect?
Politics have changed.
Most of us here can read, and the rest are clever dyslexics. We are, I mean, you know, some of you can operate a mobile phone. They couldn't now, and I don't think I can.
People in the Middle Ages weren't any stupider.
They believe some really wacky things.
Why were the type of regimes that existed in power, 1500, you're talking about Catholic power in Europe, the Holy Roman Empire, controlled by the Pope and his representatives, you know, effectively a feudal regime, people tied to the land, lords and feudal barons controlling society, people bonded to the land on pain of death. Under Queen Elizabeth, for example, 70,000 people were executed. 70,000 people were executed for leaving the land as vagrants. The Tyburn tree was over here, they were hanging people day in, day out. So, why the difference?
Well, today,
Britain was like Britain at that time was like the Islamic State, right? So why was that different then? And why is Britain no longer like Islamic State?
People can't agree on what happened 60 years ago, let alone what happened 600
They
years
can't
ago.
agree what's happening now.
So I wouldn't trust history so much if I were you.
No, I'm not saying trust history, but clearly Britain was different in 1500 than it is now. Clearly Britain is different from China. Clearly Britain is different from Cuba. Clearly America is different from South Africa. Something must be causing those differences in the way that power is exercised and in the way that the people tolerate or don't tolerate existing power relations. And therefore the nuance of understanding is not simply resolved by saying everything's the same everywhere because people are exploited and man is bad and God must save us. Instead of this, even if you believe in God, by the fact that you're holding the Bible in your hand, I assume that's the case, even if you believe that to be the case, and I don't bother by it, don't worry, even if you believe that's the case, it doesn't resolve the question as to why human society is organised the way it is here and now, and organised in certain countries differently to that in other countries. And that's why a communist party is in power in China and operates a certain way, and why a capitalist government is in power in Britain and operates a different way. It's not enough to say simply man is bad and this is the fate of them. It's all the same.
System, you've got an oligarchy, you've got a cabal, you've got a conspiracy of people at the top.
Well, why does one differ from another?
What I'm saying is this country, they present it differently. So, for example, in communist China, the oppression might be overt, whereas in this country, it's like, don't say anything against the Jews, that's anti-Semitism. Don't say anything against immigration, that's racism. So, you know, in China, you might have controls on freedom of speech.
I prefer to be no platform than to have somebody sort of put electric shocks through me, or use my body to plasticize. Yeah, well, they don't yet, so therefore your argument...
Let me try and qualify what you just said. Throughout the coronavirus pandemic, I put it in inverted commas for choose to insert whatever meaning you have for the pandemic. China has been freer than Britain for a year and a half. Since April last year, China has been freer than Britain.
To wander around, but not to talk like you're doing. They've been freer to wander around, sure.
Big on,
In China, people have been freer to wander around than we have been for the last few months because they haven't done them so hard
to wander around.
You are free to
I've been arrested six times. Six times for
Okay.
speaking out in the last year.
Yeah.
6 times.
And you've come back and you haven't been sort of murdered in prison.
True, but in
It does
China,
happen in
I
China.
assure you, in China there are more protests, more demonstrations than there are in Britain. There wasn't much of that.
I'd like to see more.
It's one of the most militant working classes in the world. Not only that, but an interesting characteristic of Chinese protests is that when workers, for example, go on strike or demonstrate, they nearly always win. When workers protest and demonstrate in Britain, they nearly always lose. There's a clear distinction between that. And when workers go on strike and demonstrate in China, they're nearly always led by communists. When they go on strike and demonstrate here, they're nearly always led by trade unionists who fail to organise anything. So there are differences, and understanding the differences between different regimes allows you to understand what type of society we live in and what causes those differences.
I don't know if any of you have ever met any educated Chinese people, but you can never get them to question the Communist Party. It's like something. It's like
Sorry, I didn't catch you.
When you meet an educated Chinese person, someone who's gone to university, so you try and question them about the Communist Party, it's like a switch goes off in their brain.
They're probably afraid that you'll report back to
they
them.
know. That's right. They know if you question the Communist Party in China, you'll get arrested. You'll get put in a.
You need to speak to more Chinese people.
You'll be left to rot.
It's just simply not true.
Because I've spoken to Chinese people.
Yeah, okay, how many? There's a lot more than you've spoken to.
Look, they can't get on Facebook and WhatsApp and all
Facebook and WhatsApp.
They can't communicate freely.
Facebook and WhatsApp. And we can communicate, I can show you my Facebook.
You're probably talking to a bot.
You can guarantee that of the last 5 or 6 messages I posted, all of them have had a message from Mark Zuckerberg and co. saying that what I'm saying is false. Almost every single comment I make gets some sort of...
They try and talk to someone in China on Facebook.
Well, because they don't allow Facebook.
Yeah, that's what
And they're right not to allow Facebook. They're right not. They ban Facebook and they ban Google. Google is not in favour of free speech.
Oh, so the Chinese are in favour of free speech.
Facebook was directly implicated in the Cambridge Analytica scandal.
We know that.
In which, well, you
They
know
are
that, but then you know that they
the
manipulate
Chinese
elections
government
around
is
the
a lot more
world.
evil.
You know that's a fact. There was an inquiry in Parliament in Britain about exactly that. Mark Zuckerberg refused to turn up to the inquiry. There was an inquiry in the United States where he was subpoenaed to turn up to answer questions. And that guy Chris Wiley, exposed they were involved not only in shifting the balance of elections by manipulating electoral processes, but also that they were involved in almost certainly in murders in Kenya against opposition figures in Kenya, and involvement in the Malaysian elections, I believe it was, in the British elections, in the American elections, to shift the balance of power to those who paid them best. And Mark Zuckerberg himself, just prior to the decision, to the discovery of the Cambridge Analytica events, he was planning to stand as President of the United States of America. Google has been operating in direct collaboration with the American mayors and governors who are in favour of all the pandemic preparedness activities in order to promote, alongside with Bill Gates, an agenda of control over the world based on modern technology. And so the idea that Facebook, the idea that Facebook, Google and Microsoft are somehow serving freedom and humanity is simply idiotic. It's completely false.
They're suppressing it less than the Chinese IT.
You argue that, but actually, Twitter is the same thing. Look, Twitter. I've never been a supporter of Donald Trump. But the banning of Donald Trump from Twitter, the president of the wealthiest country on earth and the most powerful country on earth, shows you that Twitter believes it is superior in power and authority to the president of America, who at least was elected, who elected Twitter, who elected Facebook. Who elected Microsoft? Who elected Google? But to deny that Google and Facebook have more power than any individual government in the world is simply idiotic. Of course they've got more power.
It's the same as fascism. That's why Hitler was called a National Socialist Party. They were the same as communism.
My friend, there's no complexity to your argument. I'll ignore it until you come back with something a bit more sophisticated.
I think you're slightly wrong. When you said who voted for Google, who voted for Facebook, everyone who buys their products is basically giving their vote.
Sorry, can you tell me what their contract, when you first joined up with Google, and up until now, can you tell me any clauses in the contract that you signed up to?
No, but I'm just saying.
One clause.
You're in favour of
one
them.
clause.
You don't need to.
No.
People
In other
want
words,
to be part of it.
people inadvertently agree to lose their rights so they can participate in social life around them. Inadvertently. They have no idea what they've agreed to. No idea whatsoever. And in reality, thank you for coming.
Hallelujah!
Hallelujah! Praise the Lord!
End is
Thank you. Everyone, please take this on video, everybody.
I am the Son of God!
Son of God.
I'm the Messiah! Hallelujah!
He's one of my
Allah
nations.
Akbar!
The other side.
Allah Akbar!
The other side. America, Russia, we go to. Hang on. I haven't answered the show. Thank you very much. See you again. It's time for your garbage, Booster! We'll give you some AstraZeneca to snort in a minute. In powdered form.